So, picture this. Two political parties in 1920s China, the Nationalists, or Kuomintang, and the Communists, decide to team up. It's a united front to unify the country. Adorable. The KMT is led by Kai-shek, a man who trusted the Communists about as far as he could throw a tank. The CCP, still in its infancy, saw this as a great way to grow their brand. The whole arrangement had the stability of a Jenga tower in an earthquake. On April 12, 1927, in Shanghai, Chiang decided the trust exercise was over. He initiated a purge, a bloody citywide massacre of communists, union members, and anyone who looked vaguely left-leaning. It turns out unifying the country had some very specific, very violent terms and conditions. The first date did not go well. After getting thoroughly routed, the Communists decided the best course of action was to go for a walk. A very, very long walk. The Long March wasn't some strategic masterstroke, it was a year-long, 6,000-mile, panicked retreat across China's most unforgiving terrain. They started with around 86,000 people in the main force. After crossing snowy mountains, treacherous rivers, and fighting off KMT forces the whole way, they ended up with maybe 7,000 survivors. An attrition rate of over 90% is not usually what you put on the victory banner. And yet, this catastrophic failure was rebranded into the founding myth of Communist China. It was the ultimate triumph of marketing over mathematics, a character-building experience that conveniently eliminated most of Mao Zedong's political rivals. Just as Chiang Kai-shek was about to finally crush the remaining communists, Japan decided to get involved, by which I mean they invaded. This put Chiang in an awkward position. His own people wanted him to fight the foreign invaders, but he was weirdly obsessed with wiping out the CCP first. Things came to a head in 1936 when one of his own generals, Zhang Shuiliang, straight up kidnapped him. The Xi'an incident, as it's called, was basically a military intervention to force your boss to do the obvious thing. A new, incredibly tense united front was formed. Japan's invasion didn't just save the CCP from annihilation, it gave them a decade to regroup and play the role of the true patriots, while the KMT did most of the dying. The war against Japan created a fascinating split screen. On one side, you have the KMT army fighting massive, brutal, conventional battles and losing millions of soldiers. They were getting hammered by the Imperial Japanese army in places like Shanghai and Nanjing. On the other screen, you have the Communists. They engaged in guerrilla warfare, which is a fantastic way to annoy an occupier without having to, fight them head-on in major battles. More importantly, while the KMT was bleeding out, the CCP was busy in the countryside, implementing land reform and winning over the peasantry. They were building a state within a state. By the time Japan surrendered, the KMT had a victory on paper, but the CCP had won the loyalty of millions of people. World War II ends in 1945. Let's look at the tail of the tape. In this corner, the Nationalists. They are the recognized government of China, a founding member of the United Nations, possess an army of over 4 million men, and have the full financial and military backing of the United States. And in the other corner, the Communists. They have a peasant army, a collection of captured Japanese weapons, and the moral support of the Soviet Union, who were busy stripping Manchuria of all its industrial assets. On paper, this should have been the shortest civil war in history. It's like a heavyweight champion stepping into the ring with a plucky amateur. Anyone placing bets on the amateur would have been laughed out of the room. And they would have been very, very rich. One of the fastest ways to lose public support is to make their money worthless. The KMT apparently took this as a challenge. They financed their wars by printing money. So much money. This led to hyperinflation that makes other economic crises look like minor pricing errors. We're talking prices doubling every few weeks. People were taking wheelbarrows full of cash to buy a single bag of rice. In 1948, the KMT introduced a new currency, the gold yuan, to fix the problem. It promptly collapsed within 10 months. This economic apocalypse destroyed the urban middle class, the very people who were supposed to be the KMT's base. Meanwhile, the communists in their rural areas were dealing in barter and land redistribution, which suddenly looked incredibly stable and appealing. If economic incompetence wasn't enough, the KMT was also breathtakingly corrupt. It wasn't just a few bad apples, the entire orchard was rotten. High-ranking officials and their families, like the infamous Soong sisters, amassed enormous fortunes through embezzlement and shady deals. Generals would sell American-supplied fuel and weapons on the black market, sometimes directly to their communist enemies. The soldiers on the front lines were often unpaid, unfed, and equipped with faulty gear because their commanders had pocketed the funds. Conscription was basically a death sentence for the poor, while the rich bought their way out. The KMT had lost what ancient Chinese philosophy calls the mandate of heaven, which is a fancy way of saying everyone knew they were crooks. While the KMT army was disintegrating from the inside, the communist forces were having a renaissance. Renamed the People's Liberation Army, or PLA, they benefited immensely from the Soviet presence in Manchuria. The Soviets let them take mountains of surrendered Japanese weapons and provided crucial training. But their real strength came from defections. Entire KMT units, fed up with corruption and starvation, would just switch sides, bringing their American equipment with them. The PLA also had superior morale, driven by ideology and the promise of land for peasant soldiers. Their commanders, like the brilliant Lin Biao, were running circles around the KMT's politically appointed squabbling generals. The PLA wasn't just an army, it was a political movement with guns. The final phase of the war, from 1947 to 1949, was a masterclass in KMT failure. The decisive Huai-hai campaign is a perfect example. The Nationalists had more troops and better equipment, but were plagued by terrible leadership. Chiang Kai-shek would personally call his generals from the capital hundreds of miles away to micromanage troop movements. It's like trying to play a real-time strategy game with a 48-hour lag. His commanders, often rivals, refused to help each other. The communists, meanwhile, used brilliant encirclement tactics, trapping and destroying KMT armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands. They lost over 500,000 men in this single campaign, a blow from which they would never recover. It was less a battle and more a controlled demolition of an army. And where was the United States in all this? They were watching in horror, like a parent who gave their kid a brand new car only to see it immediately driven into a lake. They sent billions in aid and military hardware to Chiang. They even sent General George Marshall to try and broker a peace, which failed spectacularly. Secretly, American diplomats and military observers were sending reports back to Washington describing the KMT government as corrupt, inept, and doomed. President Truman privately expressed his utter frustration with Chiang, but politically, he couldn't just abandon the anti-communist side. So America was stuck, propping up a regime that was actively working against its own survival. The eventual "who lost China" debate in the US was a classic case of blaming everyone except the guy who actually crashed the car. By 1949, the gig was up. The communists were sweeping across the country. The KMT's grand strategy became a panicked exodus to the island of Taiwan. This wasn't a strategic relocation, it was a frantic scramble for the lifeboats. They managed to airlift hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians, but more importantly, they packed up China's entire gold reserve and thousands of priceless artifacts from the Forbidden City. It's one of history's greatest heists disguised as a government retreat. On October 1, 1949, Mao Zedong stood in Tiananmen Square and declared the founding of the People's Republic of China. Kai-shek was left on an island, surrounded by art, dreaming of a reconquest that would never, ever happen. It was the ultimate "I'm not leaving, you're leaving" moment. So, how did a peasant army beat a superpower-backed government? The simple truth is the communists didn't so much win the Chinese Civil War as the nationalists insisted on losing it. They lost it economically, through hyperinflation. They lost it politically through staggering corruption. And they lost it militarily through sheer incompetence. The CCP offered a brutal, uncertain future, but the KMT offered a demonstrably rotten present. The Chinese people weren't necessarily choosing communism, they were choosing anyone but the KMT. It's a timeless story, really. A government that loses the trust of its people, that values personal wealth over national well-being, will eventually find itself on the wrong side of history, or in this case, on the wrong side of a 100-mile-wide strait. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!